Were you, I'm guessing you may not have been sort of celebrating with great joy yesterday's events. Were you anywhere in the vicinity? Were you at Trafalgar Square or anywhere, or were you elsewhere?
Yeah, I was down at the Republic protest in Trafalgar Square yesterday.
Right. And how many, roughly, would you say were there?
It's hard to say because there were different people in different groups, and I think the police at some point stopped others joining the demo, so they formed a separate demo. So I'd say probably around the low thousands,
Right.
late hundreds, low thousands, but it's hard to say because they're in different groups and split up.
So obviously there's the question marks raised as to whether or not the police were appropriate in their tactics yesterday. I mean, hopefully you'd agree with me that in a democracy, the right, in a sense, as part of that, you have a right to debate, we have a right to protest, but not the right to disrupt and obstruct. And that's the difference in the line. And I guess what the police were concerned about was that they'd obviously got some intelligence. Certain people were there who had a track record of, I think one person actually was arrested, threw eggs at the King last November. So they were justified to be seriously concerned.
They might be, but I agree with you. That's where the line is drawn. But I think that the police's case on this is frankly nonsense because they arrested the leadership and the chief exec of Republic, and that group is everyone just knows that they are a legitimate, peaceful, lawful group. And more importantly, whenever Just Stop Oil or Extinction Rebellion or other groups protest, the police say, you've got to do this properly, lawfully, etc. That's exactly what Republic did. They literally went for meetings with the police for months, entirely agreed what they were going to do. They told the police everything, agreed it, the police said yes, and then the police betrayed that, which I think is very unwise for them to do so, because what they're saying is, if you do act legitimately, lawfully, tell us all your plans, we're still going to stiff you, which is what they did. And they arrested the leaders of a group who nobody thinks were going to act unlawfully because they're a legitimate mainstream group. And frankly, the reasons given are poor.
Okay, so, no, and I hear all that, and that is interesting. They have to make the judgment, of course, between protest and disruption. The fact that, by your estimate, there were 1,000 or some thousands there shows that, in a sense, that element of protest, and it seemed to go well, because the issue of disruption, of course, what I noticed, I'm not sure exactly where you were, I was very surprised by the skittishness of some of the horses in the first procession coming from Buckingham Palace towards Admiralty March, and there was suggestion that some people had thrown things under the horses. I mean, these things can barrel out of hand very, very quickly with live animals, and that would have immediately moved into massive disruption, which, in a sense, that I think is what the police and the vast majority of the public would not have wanted to see. And of course, we're on the world stage.
Oh, but I don't see how arresting the leaders of Republic and effectively causing the Republic demonstration to be cancelled went any way towards that. I mean, let me just explain what Republic were intending to do. They were intending to have a small stage and the speaker...
I've just lost your sound.
Who believe...
Paul, sorry, could you go back to the small stage? We just lost your sound for a second.
Yeah, sorry. A small stage and a small sound system where speakers who believed in republicanism could go and speak. And that would actually draw demonstrators away from the main procession, away from the horses. And again, it's completely lawful, non-disruptive, peaceful, everything you like. And yet the police, that didn't go ahead yesterday because the police, I think, unlawfully arrested the organisers of that demonstration. And I was actually going to speak at that demo, and I had my speech prepared. And I actually wasn't really going to mention the King much or my feelings towards the monarchy. I was going to talk about why I loved my country. All those things that to me makes Britain and these islands special that aren't to do with the monarchy and that the monarchy sometimes obscures. That was what, and I was prevented from doing that by the actions of the Met Police.
But what about the point?
It's very sad.
They, as I understand, they either arrested people or took away megaphones that were being carried by certain anti-monarchists, either along the Mall or around Trafalgar Square. But surely that's part of the point, that that's actually going to cause disruption, which A, might upset the horses, but B, this is, from the UK's perspective, this is actually a strategic day of national importance where disruption, I mean, in a sense, would have been catastrophic in our image around the world.
It wouldn't have caused disruption. I think the megaphone that was confiscated was from the head of Republic. And again, I go back to the fact the head of Republic has had meetings with the Met Police where they said, we are going to have this stage away from the procession. Obviously, you need to have some form of sound amplification, but they'd agreed with the Met Police that that could be in Trafalgar Square, sufficiently far away from the procession that it wouldn't cause any disruption. And it wouldn't, because it's not next to the processional route. Yeah, of course, it's important that the event wasn't disrupted, but that's why Republic agreed with the Met Police of what their plans were. And 25% of the UK are Republicans, effectively. That's millions of people who weren't represented today, whose voice was quashed by the unlawful actions of the Met Police.
But actually,
and I think that's something that's very anti-British values.
But actually, it wasn't quashed because you were still there. And there's been coverage in the media. I don't know if you're doing any other media today, but, you know, I've got you on. So in a sense, the voice is being represented, and that's an appropriate thing. I think what many people, like, I guess, both the authorities and indeed other members of the public who support the monarchy are concerned about, the track record of protests recently has been one of disruption and obstruction. I know it's from other groups, but very often there's crossover between some of the members. And I think those were the judgments the police, they obviously concluded, you know, where they had to draw the line yesterday morning.
Well, I mean, you say that we didn't get to have our voice because, I say, there's a difference between sort of shouting, which is all we could do in the end, shouting slogans near the procession, versus an actual organised event where people can actually make speeches saying why they believe in republicanism. And you say that my voice has been heard, but it's been talking about the actions of the Met and the protests. If you want to give me 10 minutes to make the speech that I would have made in Trafalgar Square yesterday, where it...
I'm very
happy to do that on TalkTV today. I'm very happy.
Listen, give me. I can't give you 10 minutes. I can't give you 10 minutes, Paul.
But there we are.
But I can give you. Hang on. I haven't finished.
My voice yesterday on that was silenced by the Met Police.
Hang on, Paul. Hang on.
Unlawful actions, and
you
I
haven't
take that
heard me
very
out.
seriously.
Give me 2 minutes, not 10 minutes. Come on, go for it. Summarise it into a couple of.
Off the top of my head. Okay.
Silence.
I really do. No, I've got to get my thoughts together. I think sometimes the over-concentration on the monarchy and on the figure of one man really excludes what is magical, beautiful and special about these lands and about the people that inhabit them. There are so many people in this country who give their all for care and love and help for others, and do so much more for this country and their compatriots than, frankly, the monarchy has ever done. And I believe that we should celebrate those people and their contributions to this country rather than just the figure of one man. And actually, by putting all into one man, we actually lose those stories and we don't celebrate them enough, the incredible people that make this country genuinely what it is. You said 2 minutes. And I'd also like to say as well that we also obscure the things that really make this country magic. On Friday night, I was out in the Kentish countryside near here listening to the song of nightingales, one of the most magical experiences you can have in this country. And the nature, the rivers, the trees, these things are far more ancient than our royal family, and I believe far more special. And yet we don't protect them, we actively destroy them, partially because we don't celebrate them enough. So I think today we should celebrate what's truly magical about Britain, Paul, not just this figure of one person.
Paul, I think that's great. And thank you so much for sort of, you know, summarising that so well. And two elements to that, to which I would respond. Actually, now King Charles was one of the early environmentalists. And of course, his late father, Prince Philip, was a great environmentalist way before most people. So I think they did have an understanding of that. But in terms of communities, of course, one of the great things that many of the royals, and I might accept not all of them, but many of them actually are heads of charities. They celebrate volunteering, and that helps with fundraising for charities. And we have probably one of the biggest, most admired charitable sectors in the world. And I think the royal family are a beacon of that, of encouraging that, of working with people. You look at Prince Harry's work with the Invictus Games for disabled people, Princess Anne and many others, the King himself now with his Prince's Trust, with all the work that has done to help young people from disadvantaged areas. So I would actually say, responding to your two key points there, that the royal family are hugely supportive and contribute to those key areas.
Yeah, I think it's not about whether they support it or not. It's about what we as a nation uplift. And day in, day out, the newspapers and the tabloids are filled with the antics of one family and the frankly often quite boring minutiae of their lives, when we have a climate crisis that's raging that threatens the very basis of our civilization and ongoing destruction of nature and heritage, and also communities in this country. And imagine if we just devoted this space that we put in the media to the royal family with the actions of ordinary people around the country who day in, day out.
I think that's but do you not accept that actually the royal family play a significant role in helping charities with profile, in helping them with fundraising, raising money for so that they can employ more people to do great work, to be able to fundraise for buildings, to house the works of charities? All of that is a huge part of what they do.
I think if the duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall and all the Crown estate were fully nationalised and the profits from that were given for charity instead, it would be significantly more than the royal family raising for charity.
I'm so glad you raised that, because do you know how much of the Crown estate's profits do go to the taxpayer, actually, i.e. you and I and everybody listening and watching and others?
Sorry, I don't know the exact funding formula. Yes, the majority goes to the government, yes.
And the government is us, the taxpayer. So I can tell you it's about 85% of the Crown estate goes to the taxpayer, has done for decades and decades and decades, in addition to which all of the income from the leases for renewable energy, for the offshore wind farms, which is about $1 billion a year, 100% of that goes back to the taxpayer. So actually, the truth is...
What percentage of the revenue of the duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall go back to the taxpayer?
Zero.
Zero.
Those are those are privately owned. What percentage? Those are privately owned. Those are privately owned.
What do you mean? I mean, yes. I mean, if you steal something,
how much of your profits? How much of your profits goes to the taxpayer?
Sorry?
How much of your profits goes to the taxpayer? You own your house. You don't give the rental income to the taxpayer.
Yeah, I didn't get my house by stealing it in a battle 1,000 years ago. That's the crucial difference, isn't it? William the Conqueror came in, expropriated the land and took it and said it was mine. That's what happened. But the entire basis of our land holding in the UK.
If you apply that logic, then you can apply that logic to multiple families, not just the royal family, up and down the country.
That's a wider issue. And again, one of the grossly unequal land holding in this country, which means that 92% of land in the UK is not accessible to the people who live in this country. Stems from the same thing. And in many ways, the monarchy does actually help underpin that system, which is interesting as well, and perhaps another reason why we might want to reconsider them.
It's another whole debate, but the reality is that most people, including those like yourself, don't appreciate that the vast majority of all the profits from the Crown estate go to the taxpayer.
Not from the Duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall. They got £1 billion from it in the last 50 years. £1 billion.
It's a separate private asset. Your private assets don't go to the taxpayer. So basically, you believe in nationalising everything. So you're basically a communist. Is that what you're saying, Paul?
Sorry?
Are you a communist? Do you believe in nationalising everything?
No, I'm not a communist. I mean,
you just want to nationalise the assets of one family, but no one else.
If you ask me the question, would you like to hear the answer? The answer is, no, I'm not a communist. Britain does have grossly unequal land holdings and really non-existent land taxation like most sensible countries do. So a very sensible solution to that would be to have a graduated land taxation that taxes you for holding land, the profits going into a fund that communities could use to then buy out those assets. So when people say our local pubs and post offices are all closing down and being developed, the communities could use that money and then buy it back for the community, and it'd be held on trust for the community forever. No, do you disagree with such a policy?
But the truth is, we've already got stamp duty.
Do you agree with such a policy? I believe.
I don't believe in confiscating assets. I do believe you can have a sensible debate about the right level of stamp duty on land transactions and things, and there's a whole different thing. But sadly, we haven't got all day. But, Paul, the great news is that my listeners and viewers have had an opportunity to hear from you. You have had the exposure. I hope that other broadcasters may give you the sort of generous exposure and time that we have had. We've had a sensible, rational debate, and, Paul, I'm very grateful for you coming on the show. That's Paul Powlesland, who was at Trafalgar Square yesterday. He was one of those protesters. What do you think to his thoughts? Do you agree with Paul? Do you disagree with him? What do you think about some of his thoughts on some of the other stuff? It's a fascinating debate. It's important to have that debate. But equally, and I think he did accept that there is no right to disrupt what is actually a strategically, nationally important day in our constitution, in our history, and in the eyes of the world.